And we're back. You're here with Hope 2020, having a spectacular week. What an event it's been so far. Thank you for signing in, joining. Thanks to all the comments that we've received in the live chat. I'm really excited about this next talk. Dr. Harry Jackson is with us. He has over 15 years of federal government experience in IT security, and he's currently an IT consultant specializing in supporting the intelligence community, as well as the Department of Defense. He's going to tell you more about that. What we're going to hear about is something called DHS BioWatch, and it's subtitled "A Failure of Oversight and Accountability." This is a story of how in excess of $1 billion was essentially mismanaged by the government. Let's watch this movie and we'll come back for some live question and answer when the movie's done.
Hello, Hope 2020. I'm Dr. Harry Jackson. My presentation is going to be on DHS BioWatch, a failure of oversight and accountability. Now, what is DHS BioWatch? BioWatch is the only system that was to provide early warning and detection of both a pandemic, which unfortunately most of us are now familiar with, as well as acts that are indicative of an act of bioterrorism. And it was run by the Department of Homeland Security Office of Health Affairs, later taken over by their DHS Weapons of Mass Destruction Office. So before we go into this any further, the system was actually slated for termination, so it was replaced by FIDA Section 21. And the reasons why they're citing is that they said the technology just isn't quite that mature. What I'm going to be revealing to you during this presentation is that may not be the case. And the issues where, in this case, where I am a whistleblower, particularly regarding this program, we'll find out I'll reveal to you the other reasons. All right, a little bit of administration here. I'm just going to leave this up for here. This was the correspondence I've had with the DHS Office of Public Affairs, which actually is now responsible for pre-publication review. A little bit about my background. I used to be at DHS, for those who read my bio, as the Information System Security Manager. In addition to being an information professional, where I teach a number of IT security, IT certifications with CISP, CEH, for another of institutions. I also teach in the college level. But also my background in the last 15 years, I've been working in the intelligence community as well as supporting Department of Defense. And when you handle classified information, you have to do, particularly in programs that handle classified information, you have to submit works for that, or for publication, as well as for speaking, at conferences such as this one. They have to go to pre-publication review. Now, I've already been retaliated once for a work that I published. I did go through pre-publication review, and now I'm actually presenting again the evidence that I did go through pre-publication review again. None of this material that I'm going to be talking about is classified. All of it is unclassified, though it may be embarrassing to the agency. But however, in this case, it's not the agency's fault. We're actually going to identify about half a dozen individuals that were specifically responsible for the actions that took place. Also, since I gave you some of my bona fides about talking about IT, let me talk about some of my other credentials. I am a retired naval officer for 20 years, where I've been supporting the Defense Intelligence Agency. And I've also been a professor at National Intelligence University teaching the Cyber Intel course. So when I start speaking about classified information and handling of classified information, I actually believe I'm a credible authority. And when I talk about acquisition, I also have a program management background. I've been a PM for over 10 years at DHS. I'm a level 3 program manager and a level 3 contracting officer's representative. I've been through the Homeland Security Acquisition Institute level 3 course, as well as the Defense Acquisition University's third level program management. So I am familiar with PM level, and I do teach PM courses as well. So I think I know what I'm talking about when I get to those topics. Okay, since we've talked about that, I've gone through pre-publication review. All right, this story's been a little bit in the media for some times now. What you're going to see over here to the right, this was the one that kind of started it off. This was when I started seeing issues within the DHS Program Office, like when I started trying to inform the CIO, Mr. Michael Williams, when I started noticing that my presentations to go before him were getting pulled, when I did inform my immediate supervisors, which we'll talk about a little bit later about it. They tried to deny it. I went to DHS OIG not once, but twice. And then I also brought this matter up to the Office of Security within DHS, which did nothing about it. But then I went and got pre-publication review, which to my surprise, they approved, and I was able to publish this work in the Journal of Bioterrorism and Biodefense. And then the following year later, a few months later, I was retaliated against. But then later on, with about 7 months later, OIG the Privacy Office actually did their own audit on the system and confirmed all of my findings with the issues with this system. And then there have been other issues where we talked about with the system, particularly leaking sensitive data, that was picked up by Defense One, then on the front times of the LA Times, later in 2019. And then with my whistleblower case, which Homeland Security eventually did not want to investigate, then decided to open it when it hit the LA Times again. And then we can also talk about, unfortunately, ignoring the heavy cost of biosurveillance in National Defense Magazine. All right, so that's a little bit about me. Let's go and delve right into BioWatch. I'm going to talk to you about what the purpose of BioWatch, how this system evolved, as the technology system evolved, the funding issues and anomalies that occurred within the system, and the assessment of the fielded system, some of the issues we saw with the systems, with the security plan, the contingency plan, as well as steps that could be taken later on to how to mitigate most of this. Okay. All right, let's talk about what is BioWatch. And in October 2001, after the 9/11, the nation experienced anthrax attacks. There was an individual sending packets of anthrax throughout the Postal Service, and the DHS was actually this response to this. Actually received presidential attention under the second Bush administration when they issued Homeland Presidential Security 10, Biodefense for the 21st Century, and HSPD 21, Public Health and Medical Preparedness. Is another issue this has, that this program serves both a national security and public sector community. So it has both a national security and public health interest. It is the nationwide early detection system to detect pandemics as well as acts of bioterrorism. And the technology at the time, we typically, when I talk about, because some of the criticism this program has had, they said the technology wasn't mature. Biodetection technologies have been around since the Cold War era, 1980s and on upward. So within the government, we typically buy things at milestone B. We've done so since the 1990s. And what that means by milestone B is that we have things called technology readiness levels, that there have been technologies that have demonstrated promise within a laboratory environment, as well as prototypes within a simulated operational environment that say that, yes, this is possible, that you can create an early detection, nationwide early detection capability if it was managed appropriately. In this case, with BioWatch, it was not. At the time, when I was there at DHS, BioWatch was managed by the Office of Health Affairs Health Threats Resilience Division. The mission of it was to provide nationwide aerosol detection systems, provide early warning across all levels of government to support public health and emergency management communities to prepare for and respond to biological events. How this would have been helpful back in December of last year. This is right from the OHA website. They're no longer managing the program. It's been moved over to another office. But this is an operational view diagram just showing how there was the early recognition, even back then. This is from 2016. How early detection of a pandemic or an act of bioterrorism can lead to saving of life. And this one, for this one, early detection in this case could provide where they could reduce the loss of life by up to 30%. When I talk about the issues within this program, when I first took over in August of 2016, I looked at the system. There wasn't a lot of information about it. What struck out to me about it was that it was hosted on a .org website, which is very unusual. We have to adhere to Office of Management Budget mandates, and this one in particular, A130, that says thou shalt have sites hosted on a .gov. And if you do host it on .org, it has to be approved by the agency head. In this case, it would have had to be approved by the Secretary of Homeland Security, in this case, Jay Johnson. But what I noticed that Mr. Johnson did not approve the site's operation on .site. Then I noticed that it lacked a trusted internet connection. It didn't require multi-factor authentication, but it was also categorized as low. And I'll go into that a little bit more about why it doesn't really have a priority. When I looked at the system security plan, I didn't see much regarding it, and I saw its continuous monitoring scans and seemed like it was okay. But this kind of, when I make this statement that misled the DHS CIO as the status of the system, is a correct statement, and I'll go into share my experience as to how I came about finding out this information. And it really became as a fluke. When I was going through the program, doing my baseline, I got to the BioWatch program last because it was one of the lower priority systems. And when I saw that it lacked both a trusted internet connection as well as a two-factor authentication, but yet I saw it identified as a privacy information system. Now, I know that when I talk about system categorizations and a little bit later, I noticed that it's because it handled privacy. I knew that it had to have greater confidentiality controls than were deployed. And I knew it had to have a trusted internet connection and two-factor. And so when I talked to my information system security officer for the program, I said, you have to get these things or the system could get shut down. I immediately got a call from the DHS CISO deputy, Wendell Bondlin, telling me that there's a major issue. I can't threaten to take a system offline. I mentioned what the issues were. Mr. Bondlin was also previous ISM of the system back when it was first deployed. So I was kind of curious, and I scheduled a meeting with this office to meet with him about the system. Not only was it on a .org website, it was hosted on in an unmanned data center, an area that we couldn't control, had no visibility, and that they had plans. When I talked to them, they said, "Oh, we have plans to actually migrate the system to another data center." And I said, "Oh, great. Is it going to move to one of the government ones, DC1 or DC2? Those are the two data centers DHS manages, or a FedRAMP approved center, which has a certain minimal level of standards and security?" And the answer was no. But then as we're going in this discussion, then they said that they had a bunch of subsystems deployed on this system. And I was curious, like, there are subsystems? None of these are mentioned in your security plan. And I asked for information regarding which ones are what's about this information. And I'd asked to give the information, and I found out information about one was called Program Management Office. And I said, "Oh, so what does this do?" I said, "Well, this is what tracks the cloud if there's an actual event of bioterrorism." I said, "Oh, really?" And I asked, "Well, what could happen if this information is disclosed to a person unauthorized to receive it?" And they said, "Well, then you would have somebody that would know the capabilities of the BioWatch system and know how to evade detection if they wanted to deploy a biological agent." And I said, "Oh boy, that sounds like that your baseline's not low, it could be high, that this could be a national security system, and I need to see this information immediately." And sure enough, and as we'll go into this later, I said, this has classified information on it, and I declared a classified spill. Other things I investigated with this issue not only deal with the mishandling of classified information, it also deals with mishandling and abuse of government funding as well, and gross mismanagement. But what I had noticed in the issues from this issue we'll continue to talk with is that the system had several. When I had my own system, I had the system scanned externally, and I found several critical and high vulnerabilities that were never reported. The system was this program had reported its own scans and sent them in, but when I scanned it, I found that there were several critical and high that were never reported. So I knew that their continuous monitoring scans were falsified. The system had never gone a pen test. Normally we wouldn't have, because its baseline was considered the bare minimum security. And that since the support was launched in 2007, it underwent unrestrained and undocumented growth, as I shared with you earlier about the system security plan. And I talked about the numerous subsystems, and one actually processed stored information at the secret level. Another one was that another subsystem within this that was deployed actually handled all the programmatic information, which itself is a huge issue because it presents a fraud, waste, and abuse issue. It was a privacy system as well, and did not have adequate privacy controls. That was later found in an audit as well. And leadership made inaccurate decisions on how to handle classified information. Now, the issue that we have with .orgs is that one, in this case, most in large enterprises, and for a system that's a nationwide system like this, typically is subject to a change control board, which is important because you want to know what changes are reviewed and approved to go onto this particular system. You want to make sure things work and things don't break. Well, in this case, there was no change control board for the BioWatch program. So they had no record of all the changes that were made. They just knew what the current configuration was, or a record of who approved it. Now, the other issue that is, we talked about third parties not required for a .org is an RMF, meaning that you're going to get to avoid oversight. You're not going to be monitoring the site or web application for security. You're not being subject to OIG audits. You're not being subject to congressional scrutiny. And because of that, the color money requirements, and what I mean by color money is that within the government, you can only spend certain funds on certain things. For example, if you have funds for research and development, you can only use those funds for research and development. If you use money that is given to you for operations and maintenance, you can only use it for operation and maintenance in the system. You can't use that to go make and purchase something else or to use it for travel. Now, As we talk about the level of funds within this, we know what the system, I'll show indicate with you what the system was funded, what the funds were actually was spent, where the delta was, and where did that money go. But yet you have these individuals, I'll bring it to your attention, you have these individuals that run this program going to major events such as the Super Bowl, the NBA playoffs, and the Rio Olympics. This goes into another, the response time, and this is a little bit morbid considering the current environment we're in, where the response time, that if you can have an aerosolized release of a pathogen, of how you can actually help how a speedy early detection and early treatment leads to a recovery and lives saved. And another one from the BioWatch, again from their BioWatch website, with what would happen without BioWatch. And this is again from 2016, knowing that ongoing response and the percent casualties. And if you look at day 10 here with 100%, depending on what was released into the area, I think we can look at this in hindsight. That even we look at the COVID, where we know it's like it takes 2 weeks for detection, or to see symptoms occur from initial exposure, but they could see, like, when they're having with detection, they could hopefully respond within 4 days. And another one from the OHA website regarding time to release and triggering into what BioWatch's purpose is for, is to activate national resources in response to a pandemic or active bioterrorism. Now, as I said before, the technology at the time when this was called for was at technology readiness level 7 or 8. It did require some program management to make the system work. When you hear reports saying of false alarms and false alerts, well, the false alerts could have easily been caused by a false flag, because we did see indications when I had it scanned externally that there had been a pen test attempt. I did discover that not only did it lack a trusted internet connection, two-factor authentication, and it was connected to the dirty internet, but it also lacked an intrusion detection system. And during the initial scan we did externally, we was scanned for 30 days from a single IP address, and didn't raise a single alert. So they had no way of telling what the system was. So it's quite conceivable that this could have been, that most of the indications could have been due to a false flag. Okay, when we talk about the funding estimates with Generation 2, this is the one we're currently in right now. The time to detect is at best 10 to 36 hours. We have about 30, not a few hundred units, about 30, and it's projected and funded at about $800 million a year. What they wanted to propose in Generation 3, which was denied because they didn't have adequate requirements developed back in 2015, which they're now proposing again, and Biodetection 21, should be costing anywhere of estimates of about $200 million a year to operate. That's if things are done right. Now, things were not done right. As we saw, this is from 2012 from a conservative group, Judicial Watch, where they discovered that that they had DHS hid records of $1 billion from the system from Congress, and BioWatch being that system. And what they didn't realize that, DHS couldn't find it because the program manager, Michael Walter, and who got approval from Michael Brown and Paul Beckman, were able to get the system deployed on a .org, manage it from a .org. Of course, the records are on a .org. They're not within a .gov. They're not subject to FOIA. There's no accountability, no transparency, and it's a blatant ongoing. And not only that, the system was never even registered with OMB as a major OMB IT major investment. So this is the funding that BioWatch received during its time when I was there I was there from 2010 to 2017, but this is from the funding from 2007 to 2017. So it was funded about $1 billion from what I was to obtain. Now, I mentioned I'm a core, so I actually got a hand when I started seeing a lot of these problems with this system, particularly when I bring to you the attention, like when I talk about going into more depth about the categorization baseline, I found discrepancies there. I'm like, if this system's funded this much, why is the security so inadequate? So I actually looked up the contract for the vendor that's actually provisioning and deploying the system. So the base funding for this one was you're funded $80 million a year, but the base period funding for 1 year is just a little bit, $10.5 million, with a total funding of $64 million. So I was saying, there's a huge area in this area with this. And that's what I'm going to share with you on this next slide. The funding anomalies showing the projected cost of $80 million, the actual funded amount in millions from 2013 to 2017. That was actually in the remedy system. And I see how much funds they actually committed annually contractually. I mentioned that a little bit earlier over here. But then this is the unaccounted for funds. Like, where did this money go to? Now, as I shared before, this system, the individuals that ran the program, not the technical people, but the ones that were managing it, did use BioWatch funds to go to special events. They went to the Super Bowl, the NBA playoffs, the Rose Bowl, and the Rio Olympics. I think they even went to some NASCAR events too. So a lot of the people, these individuals, went on some vacations. And then we can talk about this is followed up later when Judicial Watch, the watchdog group came in there. This was published in 2020. They found at least $1 billion wasted. They didn't know where it was, but they haven't seen this presentation, and I'll point to you exactly who actually did this. All right, now let's talk about security. Now, I'm going to talk about, it's a little bit boring for those of you that work within the federal government, and I talk about Federal Information Processing Standards. For those of you familiar with it, I'm going to talk about FIPS 199 and NIST 860. So when you have a system, which we follow the Risk Management Framework, or RMF, and you might have seen that on the slides. So the first thing you do is you have to categorize your system. Is it going to be low impact, moderate impact, or high impact? If it's a low impact system, it means it's going to cause minimal loss of confidentiality, integrity, availability. But you're going to still be able to provide your primary functions. There's no loss of life. If it's a moderate impact, it can cause a serious damage. It could cause, but it doesn't involve the loss of life or life-threatening injuries. If it's a high-impact system, now remember, this systems provide early detection and warning of a pandemic and for active bioterrorism. It's a high-impact system if it has an adverse effect on the organization, operations, assets, or individuals, and can cause result the loss of life should the loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability ever occur. So this is from my InfoSec hat. Now, when we categorize these systems, you have to do it across the three pillars of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We don't address authentication and non-repudiation. But there are three areas that you have to address it. You can address low, moderate, high across either for confidentiality, integrity, or availability. Now, for a system like that, you could have a system that shows for low confidentiality, moderate integrity, moderate availability, low mod, or if you think it's high all across the board. No, I need to have high. It is a high or severe catastrophic impact if individuals get access to the information that are not authorized to receive it. It could be severe catastrophic if the information is modified by someone not authorized to modify it, or severe catastrophic if it's not available. Now, for this system, and I'll talk a little bit later about secret information that did have a security classification guide, which is your standing guidance on how to secure information. And the best, they said that this system had information classified secret. Secret being defined, anything if it's undisclosed to individuals that aren't authorized to receive it, it could have serious damage to national security. So likely in all cases, you might see this system, one would expect to have perhaps a moderate, high baseline categorization. You would think. So that's not actually what occurred for this system. This system's baseline was low. So didn't even, obviously, so I'm sure that for those of you that are following along, might find that to be somewhat shocking, and I certainly did, especially when I found out that they had the operational system actually deployed onto this website. Worse, I mentioned a few of the other controls that it was lacking: two-factor authentication, a trusted internet connection. It didn't have an intrusion detection system, and it was in an unmanned, uncontrolled space, the unmanned data center. To make matters worse, when I looked at what controls they had implemented, even for this baseline of low, they had only implemented 42% of those controls. And I mentioned earlier before, it was on OMB A130 web. It was in violation of OMB Circular A130, which dictates that you have to store information on a .gov domain. That's for purposes of accountability and for transparency and accountability. And I mentioned before the other issues, two-factor intrusion and designated as a privacy information system, not handling privacy information. In this case, it wasn't protecting the privacy information of first responders that would be called or deployed in response to a pandemic or an act of bioterrorism. And the system was in operation for some time. Even when I had retaliated and brought up these issues, I actually even spoken to members of Congress about this before. I noticed that even in March of 2018, before the Defense One article broke, that it was still operational, and it wasn't taken down until just before 25 August 2019, when the LA Times published an article on the front page of their Sunday paper regarding this portal. This is basically the architectural diagram of the BioWatch data center architecture. And highlighting on the next slide is where you can see we had the lack of a trusted internet connection, which is just basically wide open to anyone. Also, just to make matters worse, just to be quite thorough, I just said, okay, how resilient is the system? I looked at their COOP plan, the continuity of operations plan, and they didn't comply with any standard regulation. They didn't comply with your federal continuity directives 1 or 2. I'm sure these are not the most ghastly of everything I brought before, since I've already showed just finding about 400 million unaccounted for, lack of security, mishandling classified, which I'll go into a little bit more. But in this case, it wasn't even designed for resiliency should there ever a disaster occur at this site. In fact, they were dependent on the COOP plan of the cloud provider that they were using that had no idea what was being hosted on this site. Where it was hosted, it was at an unmanned data center in McLean, Virginia. This site actually had the vendor actually had alternate sites in Dallas, Texas, but they no longer existed at the time. So this kind of shows complete neglect on the part of the BioWatch program management team. And it was necessarily inconsistent providing a common, the COOP plan actually was inconsistent for providing continuity should a pandemic or a act of bioterrorism does occur. They had no resiliency if they had a natural disaster occur at the same time where they had to move to another location. Provide a current vendor LMI. I talk about the portal system owner. That was Mr. Dr. Michael Walters, who was actually in charge of this program since 2007 and one of the individuals that helped coordinate getting the system deployed on a .org by purposeful design. And to go back to that, when I say by purposeful design, it was actually in their contingency plan. When I did look at it, they said that they were going to host it on a .org because, and this was the reason, that state and local governments that they worked with did not want the government accessing information without their knowledge or consent. That was the justification that they ran with to get it approved. Now, did it get approved by DHS CIO? No, it did not. It got approved by one of his immediate subordinates that was also responsible for preventing me from informing the CIO of this activity. Didn't have any reconstitution procedures or even returning to a primary site, but I believe that's probably one of the least of the problems with this program. Didn't even have training requirements. These are just things of administration that you are supposed to do when you do have a COOP plan, is to train personnel on how to recover, identify your mission essential functions, which weren't done in this case. So I talked about some of the IT. I talked about some of the funding anomalies. I talked about the lack of transparency and oversight. I talked about some of the IT security deficiencies. Now let's talk about a little bit how they mishandle classified information. Now, as I said before, whenever you work with a program that handles classified information, you have to adhere to what's known as a security classification guide. This tells you exactly which data elements, either by themselves or in aggregation or compilation put together, rise to the level of secret. Now, for this case, I want to point to your attention. These are directly from the BioWatch Security Classification Guide as it existed in 2016. That technology advances changes the availability to detect a specific threat was classified secret. The assay limit or limited detection for a biothreat agent is also defined as secret. About operational equipment, operational status is defined as secret. Revealing that equipment cannot detect a biological agent is revealed as secret as well as information regarding specific base sequence of primers and primaries used to detect a DNA sequence is also designated as secret. Also, test results providing the specific assay performance against any or exclusivity panel, environmental panels also classified as secret, and information or deficiency, including information identified during test evaluation, is classified as secret. All right, I just said a lot of terms in there. What do all of those mean? Well, I'll get to that in just one second. But when I got that information from the information security officer as to what is being collected by this program management office database element, you can see here it's got the status of it, the sample capacity, start date, as well as total personnel. But then as we move in here, here's some other issues here with the associated agents that it's collecting. As I point forward, those are classified secret. When I look at BioWatch actual result data form elements, this talks about quality Q&A, quality assurance performed. Was it notes? What's the timestamp? Was a bar declared? Was it conducted? What are the result attributes of that particular? All of this is talking about the assay limits and the limits of what this system, the sampler, can collect and cannot collect. We also talk about this was the PII that it collected on those first responders that wasn't appropriately protected. And this also goes into the collector status, which we talked about what it can and cannot collect, what its operational status, also designated secret per the security classification guide. And we talk about bar data. What does bar data collect? It talks about the sensitivity, where this is the probability that the laboratory will correctly identify the presence of a targeted pathogen, and the specificity that I talked about a little bit earlier from the classification guide is the probability from the test will correctly identify the absence of a targeted pathogen. But we talk about the sensitivity, says what it can detect as well as what it cannot detect through false positive and false negative rates. So you can see that, okay, you're collecting bar data that we collect up here. Was it performed? Was it declared? The timestamp conducted? It clearly shows that this is actually collecting information that would be considered classified. And when I brought this to the attention of OHA senior officials, and this is a recording we actually had from that conversation, and I can have it on the other posting, and actually have the transcripts available if I can arrange that through 2600 for everyone to take if you want to take a look at it. But this is what they said in this meeting on the 1st, and this is important. They basically said that as this is from the Principal Deputy Secretary, Larry Flutie. He's just new on board, so he didn't know all the history back then, to be fair, that Michael Walter did and was able to get under his nose. But he decided to go to bat for him, and he said, and this is what they told him. They said, from a policy standpoint, we're not going to treat this information as classified, which for those of you that work classified information, that's not the case. That's not how it works. You have to go through a process for that. It has to get approved. You have to update your security classification guide. You just can't say it's too inconvenient. I'm not going to handle the security information appropriately. And realizing that that this is a big deal at the point just on the handling security information, because people can go to jail for this if you're mishandling to such a gross extent in that case. But as I said, mishandling classified was just one aspect of this program. We talked about the lack of oversight, the lack of program management. We talked about the security issues, and then handling it this privacy information as well as security information like this being inappropriate. The timeline of events, I told you it's 2016. This is when I started looking into some of the things with this system. I found this categorized because of the privacy system. If it's a privacy system, confidentiality level has to be a minimum of moderate. And then I started seeing other issues. On 17th, I had the PM disclose additional subsystems, and then I reviewed it, declared a spill. Met with several individuals I will talk about a little bit later, and this the 16th meeting where we basically said, you'll hear in the recording, that they'll look into it, which they never did. All they did and said is issue a member. They got Mr. Steve Lynch and OCSO to write a memorandum for record and close the case. Took no other action on it and kept the system operational all the way through 2019. All right, so got to put names to faces, because there's about half a dozen people that are responsible for this catastrophe, for the wasting of $1 billion for a system that's designed to have an early detection of a pandemic to save lives, as well as bioterrorism, that failed and that was mismanaged. And yes, there are 6 specific individuals that were responsible for it. This is the one gentleman that helped with the cover-up. This is Stephen Lynch. He was the Special Security Program Division Director at the time. At the time when I was retaliated, shortly later, he was quickly promoted to the Deputy Chief Security Officer within DHS. He's now the Chief Security Officer at DHS, handling clearance issues for personnel. And this is the memorandum for record that he wrote, stating that, oh, they met on the 1st and they said that they keep everything operational, which certainly wasn't the case. Other individuals, the laws that they violated by doing this, obviously Title 18, gathering and losing defense information. They're in violation of Intelligence Community Directive 703, protection of classified material, as well as other instructions, executive orders, and Public Law 107. The DHS response, if we do get a chance to play that at some point in time, maybe during a breakout session, you'll actually hear them overruling me as the ism and allowing the system to operate without any further action, closing the case. And they said they'll try to move it to up, and they're going to upgrade and they said that they'll try to host the site at one of the data centers in a mod baseline. We talk about who's specifically responsible for this. The person who helped coordinate getting the system on the .org, he did have help, was Dr. Michael Walters. He's a program manager. And if you recognize this, back in 2017, when he's off on one of his vacations, he left a sensitive document on the plane behind the Super Bowl. As I was before, CNN personnel, they thought it was sensitive. They believed it to be classified. They didn't have a copy of the security classification guide. I believe if they did, they would probably agree. They would probably realize that it was classified information. Yeah, that's what he left. So this person really had a very lax approach to security and handling things, but he was able to get away with getting this hosted on a .org, handling funds in any way he saw fit. And the individuals that helped to do that without the secretary's knowledge or without the CIO's knowledge within DHS are these two individuals here, Mr. Mike Brown and Mr. Paul Beckman, both of which have moved on to private industry. Mike Brown was the director of the Information Technology Information Technology and Services organization within DHS. Paul Beckman worked for him as one of his risk management division, and Paul Beckman was the Information Systems Security Manager for BioWatch when it was first deployed. And Mike Brown was actually served as an authorizing official, authorized the system to operate in this capacity on .org, and never came to any other further scrutiny until I came along. These are two. Now, Mike Brown, he moved on to, before he left for working at Gartner now, also became the CIO over at ICE, which I believe is a popular organization with this crowd. Paul Beckman, he actually got promoted to be the deputy CISO, as well, then became the chief information security officer for DHS before departing in February of this year. And two other individuals, both of whom had also have benefited from this program on the IT side, both of whom has also served as the information system security manager of this program and did nothing about it. And then served as my supervisors and were also involved with the retaliation, include Wendell Bonvlin and Lamont Yarborough. Both of whom are still at DHS. To my knowledge, they are both there, and that to this date, my whistleblower case has not been resolved, and those that are responsible for retaliation and well as for the responsible for the deployment and mismanagement of the system, these specific individuals suffered no repercussions for their actions. And so I got a few minutes here. What I would recommend that they do for this next system is that they move it to what we call HSDN, Homeland Security Data Network. It's actually designed to secure information up to level secret, get individuals appropriate security clearances that have access to it, take appropriate personnel administrative action, make sure that you have a COOP plan, make sure it's resilient. And those kind of summing up, but as they move forward, I talked about my experiences as a whistleblower. It's something that I currently still experience. At the time of the pandemic, while I was still working in the IC community, I've had all my, without notice, I did have all my clearances suspended, which is very odd because you typically get a statement of reasons. The government still has not responded to exactly why that is the case. So yeah, there is a definite repercussion. It's difficult to operate as a whistleblower anonymously because everyone knows who had access to the information. And in this case, we're talking about a handful of individuals that were able to take an action to mismanage the program, and that were responsible for it, and were able to actually avoid accountability for this program. But it's important to actually go ahead, and you still need a detection capability, because it's not a question of when's the next pandemic is going to happen. It's going to be when the next pandemic is going to happen, particularly with the Earth's population doubling every couple generations or so. It's only going to be a matter of time, and that there needs to be accountability, transparency and accountability when they register the system. And so to that end, when I said during like an OMBIT major investment, had they ever registered the system, it actually would have went under additional congressional scrutiny. They probably would have replaced the program manager at some point in time to actually get this on track. And who knows where we'd be today, but certainly not the predicament that we currently have. And that's all the time that I have, and thank you.
And we're back. That was fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
So we have some good questions in the chat. The first one I think would be worthwhile is in the chat, you saw that some people might have been a little confused about your disclosure. Maybe you could just restate about that you didn't include secret data, but that the data fields have collected would be secret.
Yes,
that's a subtle point, I think.
Yes, I'll be very clear about that. Everything in this presentation was unclassified. The data fields I was talking about were the fields of a subsystem that was deployed. Those fields was the data that's actually being collected by that system, and per the security classification guide, they would be classified as secret.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's clear. Thank you for restating it. One of the questions that came up is, we wonder how pervasive you think this type of essentially fraud and abuse is, especially in DHS, but maybe you're aware of elsewhere in the government. I mean, this is $1 billion case, right? Is a $1 billion case really common?
This was the worst of the worst, right? So yeah, I've seen others where, like the Sunflower Asset Management System, that one was about 3 million when I was at CIO. Is it pervasive within the federal space? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. It's been noted before that when DHS was created, that one of the concerns was that individuals could conduct inappropriate behavior and practices and hide behind layers of bureaucracy, which is a challenge when you're navigating a DHS and trying to resolve these issues.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a feel? So you definitely have a feel that there's a lot more of it going on. Do you have a feel whether government employees versus individual contractors, or small company versus some of the big companies? I mean, are any worse or better than the others, or is it really across the board, or is it more where you have to have those levels cooperating, which is, I think, a part of your story?
Right. For part of my story, in this case, these are all federal employees. And from my experience at DHS, there's mostly federal employees that were conducting this type of activity. If a contractor were to ever do that and it were to be known, they could be blackballed, which is known as or CPAR, as a bad evaluation, where they would no longer be able to do business in the federal government.
Mm-hmm. Even the biggest contractors, because you mentioned at least one of the very biggest contractors in your presentation.
Well, yes, you're talking about one that was certainly complicit. You're talking about LMI, but they were doing as they were directed to do. They were running. Yes, they were by falsifying, continuous monitoring scans, but they handed it to the government oversight. In this case, Mike Walter, who knew that they were falsified and forwarded on to headquarters. And we're thinking that the health and the security of the system is adequate when it actually wasn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. And yeah, I think you're telling us that really it does happen all the time, but the government employees have to be part of it, the actual feds. Yeah. We had a question, as you can imagine, people are very interested in your experience as a whistleblower, and you've shared that to a great extent. And could you maybe summarize what you learned about the whistleblowing process, and also maybe you have advice for other security professionals that might, come across information as you did?
Well, we talk about the whistleblowing process. I knew about the whistleblowing process, followed the whistleblowing process, and it did not protect me at all. Bringing it up to senior leadership that I had within DHS, is just for those of you who are thinking about ever whistleblowing. This was documented. I did bring it up to the supervisor at the time where I mentioned my presentation. That took no action. I then tried to escalate it to the CIO in briefs and presentations. Again, those were being pulled by my immediate supervisor, so I could not present that material. I then went to the Office of I did go to the OIG's office to report this as well per the process, and was told that they should refer me back to my supervisors. At which point in time, I then reached out to a colleague who is also an OIG with the DoD. We rephrased my complaint and my concerns, brought it to their attention again. At which point they again at this point in time again denied us to just go back to the referring agency. At that point, as a whistleblower, I then went to, before you even talk to the media, I decided to go to Congress, and I've been before the House Intelligence Senate Oversight Committee, as well as the Department of Homeland Security and Government Affairs, and I briefed them. And actually, I was in the meeting with congressional investigators, and as I was going through like third or fourth rounds of interviews, going over information, that was when I was actually retaliated. That's when I received the notice of retaliation via email that I was to come in and to have my security clearance suspended for, at this point in time, the justification that they used is that I had published an article, which at that time had already went through pre-publication review. So if you're a whistleblower, just be aware that the process may not protect you, that there's some reform that's needed in this area for protecting whistleblowers, as well as holding, and I mentioned before, accountability for those that are going to retaliate against whistleblowers.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's such a familiar story from the Hackers on Planet Earth conference, and I want to ask you about that. As you might know, we've had really a series of whistleblowers on the stage for the last set of conferences. These include people like Thomas Drake and William Binney, who had, I think, a pretty similar experience to you of trying to work within the system, trying really hard, and retaliation and so forth. We also have people that took a different approach, including Chelsea Manning and Ed Snowden on the HOPE stage. But I guess I'm wondering, really two things. One is, where do you see yourself in that, if you do, in that sort of mixture, and maybe there's more people that we haven't heard of as much than these really big names. And I'm also curious about if you would characterize a little more your motivation, even to go public, because that's something we've heard a lot about from some of these other folks. Ed Snowden wrote a whole book about it.
Well, within the spectrum, I'm definitely not a Snowden or Manning. I went by the book and worked within the institutional framework. What forced me to talk about this publicly is what's known as a forcing function. For example, this site was not taken down, no attempts were made to make it more secure, more resilient, until it was publicly released. So I talked about that front news page article within the LA Times. My case within DHS as a whistleblower was not going to be investigated. Initially, I had received a notice from Brian Volsky over at DHS Whistleblower Protection Unit that they do not investigate matters in which clearances are suspended for less than a year. Only then, when my story came to light, did they decide to reopen investigation. From my understanding right now, that there's a big turnover of personnel, and they still have yet to look into this matter. So yes, at some point in time, as a very last resort, that yes, you do have to sometimes go to the media to have openness and transparency, and to bring to light what is actually going on, what has been done, what are the continuing ongoing violations. And in this case, this is a national safety issue. The system had two functions. It was a national security mission, and it also had a public safety benefit in early detection of pandemics.
Yeah, thank you for that. We had a great question in the chat, because I think we're all technical people, and we tend to compartmentalize and treat things sort of factually. But this must have had a tremendous emotional toll on you. And we had a question that basically says, did you get emotional support outside of the agency, especially to help you to cope with this this whole situation?
Friends and family that are aware of it, that's about it. There are other whistleblower resources that are out there, but this case, there's a lot of different moving parts, and just getting somebody to wrap their heads around like what all the different aspects of it's kind of hard to explain. It takes a lot of different sessions, but I've had personal friends and family to help support me through this.
Yeah, it's what a story. I think we're getting towards the end of our time here, and I think you did say this already, but I'd like to give you the opportunity to say it again. Is what advice or lessons learned would you share with other contractors or other government employees that are in situations similar to you?
With the current framework of whistleblower protection or lack thereof, have an exit plan. Plan a different career. Obviously, know when you actually have to make that decision that you have to blow the whistle. In this case, I thought it was just so pervasive. It was one of those things like, all right, maybe I do follow my sword on this one, because they are mishandling almost $1 billion. They are putting life at jeopardy. I mean, and they're actively fighting me when I'm trying to bring up the issue to get it resolved. And yeah, I would just say have an exit plan, plan a second career at that point.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty stark advice, actually. So, well, we're at the end of our time, and fantastic presentation, great discussion. Thank you so much. This has been Dr. Harry Jackson, and this talk has been DHS BioWatch, a failure of oversight and accountability. Thank you again, and we'll be back shortly with our next talk.